Thank you very much to Pax Romana, the team that has helped us to put this webinar together to discuss one of the pressing and urgent pain points that is affecting the rest of the world, but particularly Africa, in the sense that we are really at the tail end of all the interventions, and we are also a dumping ground for a lot of myths, misinformation, and basically just trying to create an impression among our people that there's something that is targeting the African population vis-a-vis the vaccine.
Sorry, Doctor.
Yes, please.
Doctor, can I interrupt a bit? Sorry for interrupting you. It seems like there is a background noise.
Oh, from my side?
Yes.
Are you sure? I'm all by myself. Maybe I need to put my mic closer to. Is this any better? Is this any better?
Not yet.
Not yet. Maybe let's just check if everyone's mic is muted.
Yeah, everyone's mic is muted.
Okay. So I've also been told that I'm looking up. I need to. Okay. It's a very big room. Maybe it's the echo. Let me find a place where I can take this better. Just a moment. Just a few moments. That we catch up on time. Apologies that we've lost some time because of the background noise. But just to thank everyone for making it to this webinar, where we would like to look at the COVID in Africa and myths and facts around the vaccine. And in doing this, we are trying to make sure that our response is in tandem with what the rest of the world is doing. And we allay the fears that most of our people have regarding the vaccines and the agenda behind the vaccine. So we've assembled a team of experts in the field of medicine with vast experience and coming from, but some are in the African diaspora in Europe, and others are in African diaspora within Africa, from Zimbabwe, but working in South Africa. So we are hoping that this team will help us to understand the vaccine agenda, and what the vaccines are all about. And then we'll come up with a conclusion on how we proceed as Africa to inform our people on the role that the vaccine plays or will continue to play in mitigation against COVID-19. So before we get deep into our discussion, I would like to invite Malama Munkonge to give us the opening prayer, and then we'll progress with the rest of the program after the opening prayer. Thank you.
Hello. Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let us pray. Ladies and
Malama,
gentlemen.
please.
Can you hear me? Hello.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can
You can go
hear you.
ahead.
Oh, okay. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to give the opening prayer. So let us pray. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for giving us the strength, wisdom, and patience to work together and organize this wonderful and important discussion forum. We are going through a very tough time right now with the COVID-19. Dear Lord, please give us the strength through this meeting to come up with ideas, solutions, and very, very good information that can help our brothers and sisters and indeed ourselves in our dear continent, Africa, on how to manage and hopefully even combat this COVID-19 scourge that is facing us today. I ask all of this through Jesus Christ, your Son and my personal Savior, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Malama. Thank you for kicking us off with a word of prayer. At this moment, I would like to briefly just introduce the panelists. I'll just mention their names. And the first one to kickstart us will be Charles Ochero Langonya. He will give a brief introduction about himself. And he will then take it on to give share a few slides on COVID and take us through the vaccine. And then we will proceed with a panelist who was just added. So if you look at the poster, you may not see this panelist, and had nothing to, I didn't contribute to including him on the agenda because he's my namesake. So Tandeka Moyo Gwete will also be discussing the science behind COVID. And you also talk a little bit about the facts around the COVID and the vaccine. And then we have Professor Edward Kunonga. Professor Edward Kunonga is a microbiologist. He's working in Edinburgh, and he is a physician specialized in looking at, he will help us to look at policy-related issues. He's actually a lecturer in England, somewhere in England. We'll get the full details of Tandeka. And then Edward Kunonga is originally from Zimbabwe, but working in the UK. So these are the three panelists. Unfortunately, Dr. Lloyd had to pull out because of
I think we have lost Crispin.
to be able to the subject. If we are not speaking, just ensure that your mic is muted. And if you have a question or you have you want to interject, there are two ways in which you can interject. One, you can put your hand up through the app here. If you click on the 3 bars that are on the extreme left, it will give you an option for you to raise your hand. And I'll be monitoring that. And if it's an urgent issue, you can also type a message to say that you want to interject urgently. But to allow the discussants to begin and go to all the way to the end, and then we can ask clarifications, only clarifications after they have spoken. Then when we're finished a round of the 3 speakers, we're going to now have a question and answer session, and we're going to give you adequate time to interrogate our panelists and get the maximum out of them. So this is how we're going to proceed. And at this point, I would like to invite Dr. Charles Langoya Ochero to briefly just introduce himself, just a few things that you want people to go home with and about you, and then you hit home with your presentation. Thank you very much. Charles.
Thank you, Crispin, for giving me this opportunity. And without taking much time, my name is Charles Ochero, is my personal name. My family name is Langoya, and I hail from South Sudan. I work in Edinburgh, in Scotland, UK. And I'm a physician by training. And at the moment, I also work in the Department of Infectious Diseases and Medical Microbiology, and I am a fellow in the University of Edinburgh. And without taking much time, I would also, the most important part of my introduction, I would like to say that I am part and parcel of the Pax Romana family. I was the Secretary General of IMCS in Sudan before we became an independent country. And then I worked as the Eastern African Sub-Regional Coordinator. That entails Uganda, South Sudan, Sudan, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Tanzania. And then after that, I worked as an international president of IMCS Pax Romana in Paris for 3 years. So without taking much time, I think I should be able to share my slides, but I have been disabled. Could the host please make me a co-host so that I share my slides? Thank you. I think I should now be able to share my slides. So basically, I hate talking a lot, so I believe it will be an intro, like a very interactive session, but I think it will be also important to just put some facts about the vaccine, because this might help in answering some of the questions that we have, and then we take it from there. So basically the outline of my talk will be about the declaration of any conflict of interest, and I will also speak briefly about what is a vaccine and the history of it and the current vaccine production, or overall how a vaccine is produced. And then I will speak about COVID-19 vaccine types and their safety briefly. And then I will leave the rest. I know there are lots of questions there about blood clot with AstraZeneca, about, you know, Bill Gates wanting to monitor people when they go to toilets, etc. But these questions will answer them later, obviously, and that will make the beauty of this talk, I believe. But I would just like to say that I was involved in the recovery trial, and I enrolled patients in that trial. And recovery trial is a trial that had proven or established that steroids is effective in treating patients of COVID-19 that are admitted to the hospitals and who are needing breathing support or respiratory support, as we call. And I would also want to declare the fact that I have been on call as part of the on-call team members in looking after patients or after people who are recruited in the AstraZeneca vaccine during the developmental phase of it before it could be approved that it is effective. So there was a clinical trial to prove that this vaccine works. I was part of part and parcel of the team looking after patients when they develop side effects or people enroll in trial during that time. And it's also very important to say I have no, or I received no financial remuneration from any COVID-19 vaccine producing pharmaceutical company. So these are just facts that I should put them out there, I believe. And just briefly about vaccine, this is a gentleman, Edward Jenner. He is a surgeon, an English surgeon, who was the first person to bring in the concept of vaccination, although it had been there prior to his existence, but he was the person who really solidified the concept of vaccination. He basically was a physician or a surgeon that first came up with the fact that the philosophy or the knowledge behind the concept of vaccination works. And it was in 1796 when he discovered the smallpox vaccine. And the name vaccine basically comes from vaccinia, which is a virus that causes smallpox disease. So he saw that among the people that at his time when he was a surgeon, there were a group of people that work in farms, like say farmers who go and try to milk cows and come and sell milk to people in the communities. And he noticed that cows die of cowpox, but then those milkmaids, they develop the same lesions or wounds like that developed by those cows, but they don't get so unwell to a point of dying. But then the ordinary people that don't work in farms, they die. So what he decided to do was to get part of samples from the wounds of those people that work as cowmaids and he injected it into a child of his worker in his house, which is a very unethical thing to do. And I believe that also had built the fact that people became very nervous about vaccines and how it is done and whether we're being used as animals, etc. So it has been there from the start of the concept of vaccination production or vaccine production. And this has gone through until the time, the story in the US where Black community had been injected with syphilis, consciously knowing that this is a syphilis, and then injecting it into Black population and using penicillin to figure out whether it will treat it or not. So there had been a lot of black side or a dark side of vaccines, but also the fact that vaccine is the most effective intervention ever to have existed in medicine cannot be denied. Looking at this graph from 1976 until 2019, we have a lot of vaccines. And I want to believe that all of us almost who are here in this talk today might have received one or most or whatsoever among those vaccines, from hepatitis vaccination to HPV, to rotavirus, to influenza, to meningitis, to whatsoever, just name them. So this is the trend. So what I'm trying to put across is that the concept of vaccination is not anything new. So what happens when a vaccine is being produced in the lab? A vaccine has to go through these 6 stages. So basically, a group of scientists will sit down and will try to check and come out with a hypothesis whether what they are trying to do will be effective in producing a response to human body or not in creating a defense. And then they will say, okay, what should we do? Now, the stage 2 is that which components of a virus should we use to inject in a human body to make them produce the antibody, which is the immunity, so that once they are exposed to the actual pathogen, their bodies will fight against it. And then the third would be, okay, how is it safe and how effective is it? It will be tried on animals before humans. And then the fourth stage will be trying it on a very few number of people to see whether it would work or not. And it will basically be volunteers. and you have to volunteer and say, okay, well, I think this is scientifically sound, I want to volunteer. And should anything happen to me, then you'll be remunerated or your family. And then there will be approval body, the FDA in the US and the EMA, which is European Medical Medicine Association in Europe, for example. They will say, okay, now we have put a lot of patients or a lot of human beings into this trial. It has worked out, very few side effects. The benefits outweigh the risks. So let's go now for mass production. So COVID vaccines is now here on stage 6. Now, again, this is just a table or a slide to just, again, depict or to just reinforce the message that, there will be large studies on animals, then tens of people, volunteers, we call it phase 1, then hundreds of people, that is phase 2, and then phase 3, thousands of people. All this looking at the lower graph here, it is called pre-license tests. So it won't be used on populations. Countries won't be asked to buy them and use them in among their populations. But phase 4 now is where hundreds and thousands of people are using the vaccine. And this is what we call post-licensure tests. So this is now the COVID vaccines that are in the market, Moderna, Pfizer, name them, AstraZeneca, they are here in this phase. So just quickly to go through this is a very complicated slide, but I will try my level best. So RNA and DNA, they are nuclear materials in a human cell. They are genetic materials. They carry genetic information. Now, what happens is that in a process of developing a vaccine, the scientists might say, okay, let us take half of the DNA, which is breaking this piece, just half of it, or taking the whole of the DNA material, or taking the whole of the virus and injecting it in people, and then to see whether they will develop immunity or not, or just taking something similar that looks like the virus and it will deceive the body to begin saying, okay, I have encountered this virus now, let me produce antibodies. And then once the actual virus gets into the body system, it will get that the body is well equipped. And then the fifth one is just a protein. So like a particle, if I don't know whether people can see my cursor here. So these particles on the surface of the virus can just be taken. Or sometimes just the scientists will say, okay, let's kill the virus and then inject it into people, which is called inactivated. So there are a number of vaccines that are live attenuated. We call them live attenuated. So there are live viruses that are injected in people. One of the examples is the MMR, the measles, mumps, and rubella virus. It is a live attenuated virus, so live virus is injected. But also we have killed viruses. So what is COVID-19 virus, I mean vaccine made up of? It is made up of subunits, basically. And obviously there are different types or parts of viruses that are taken and made up of. Now, this is just a comparison between the Pfizer and AstraZeneca vaccine. Looking at the Oxford AstraZeneca, about 23,000 people have been enrolled and is safe and effective, proven, and in Pfizer BioNTech, about 40,000 people. And looking at the suitability for it to be given, a lot of people develop a very strong immune response in the Pfizer group, as well as in AstraZeneca group. And what doses are needed? They need 2 doses, about 3 to 12 months apart each. Common side effects are arm pain, headache, muscle aches, chills, fatigue, etc. So, and these are the side effects of COVID infection itself. So what does that mean? That means you are given something for your body to respond to in the same way it will respond if you are infected or affected by the virus itself. So just in a nutshell, this is a virus, and a part of it is taken, injected into a normal cell, and then this cell is injected into a human body, and now a human cell begins developing antibodies. So these are the soldiers, antibodies, they are in defense of your body, ready, waiting for you to be attacked by COVID-19. So once a COVID-19 virus attacks you, you have already the soldiers to fight. And now you can see that they come and attach themselves on the surface of the virus and attacks it and kills it, basically. Now, vaccines. We have the Oxford AstraZeneca. 3 of them have been approved in the UK. So the Oxford AstraZeneca, the Pfizer, and the Moderna, they are both now being enrolled in the UK. And what are the types? The Pfizer is viral vector, so they just took they modified a genetic material and made it into a vaccine. And Pfizer is part of the virus is taken, and Moderna is the RNA, which is half of the DNA is taken, and it is made up into a vaccine. All of them, they will require 2 doses. And there are many, this is just a small slide, but there are many vaccines that have already been approved, including the Sputnik of Russia, etc. Now, these are all pending. I say they are pending because they might be approved. Looking at the storage, and this will bring us later into the African context, why it is only AstraZeneca that is approved or that is being exported to Africa. Look at the temperature range. So AstraZeneca, it will require regular fridge temperature range, which is 2 to 8 degrees centigrade for maintaining vaccine. But looking at Pfizer and Moderna, they will all need negative temperatures, -70 for biotech, Pfizer, and -20 for Moderna. So in terms of keeping those vaccines safe in a tropical setting is difficult. Now, for example, in the UK, these are the priority groups who should receive the vaccine first, coming from 1st to the 9th. And the first are the people who are at most risk of dying when infected with COVID-19. So we have to prioritize them. So residents in care homes, for example. Second are people over 80s and healthcare workers. Then it goes down and down and down. People with comorbidities like heart and liver disease, etc. And then you can see that the least people who are least at risk are all those 50 years of age and over, for example. Now, maybe that also, looking at the stage 9, it might also explain as to why COVID-19 death is not so rampant in some of our settings back home. Perhaps we don't live long enough to reach old age. So looking at the manufacturing of vaccine, who are the people involved? So healthcare professionals, academia, government agencies, manufacturers, non-governmental organizations, media. So no one is going to cheat us by just producing a vaccine and bringing it to people to begin taking. So a lot of groups are involved. Now, this is an older slide. I believe it has changed already, but just looking at what is happening at the moment. So 181 vaccines are being explored in the lab in animals, and about 28 are in phase 1, 28 again in broader groups of people, and it is reducing. If you can see, it is reducing because the fact remains that as you go or you move to your right, side effects, etc., are noted that are unpleasant, and then vaccines are dropped. So at the moment, we have about 12 vaccines that are all approved and in licensed for general use, and 4 of them are under scrutiny, even if they are being used and they are being studied. Now, what are the prices of those vaccines? For Oxford AstraZeneca, it is about £10, basically, if we have to get 2 doses. Moderna is about double or more than double, basically, of that. It's about £70, and Pfizer is about £30, and like that. So what we are using at the moment in Africa is Oxford AstraZeneca. So each an individual will need about 10 to 12 pounds or dollars to get the 2 doses. That includes transportation and delivery. I mean, and storage. So just this slide, I brought it from the CDC website. It just basically depicts the 2 vaccines, which are both American, Moderna and Pfizer, and looking and saying there are 2 doses that will be needed, what type of vaccine it is effective across gender and race. I brought it here just because of the fact that it is effective, especially the race aspect of it, because there had been lots of questions that these vaccines are tested in the Western world, how effective they are for us in Africa, for example. So it is effective, and it is up to 95%. It protects you against like suffering from severe COVID. Now, looking at this map, it's just a brief map to depict. This is an older map, but there is a new one coming after this as well, the updated one. But look at, it just shows the vaccination status in the world. This is neck-like country here. I want to believe it is Chile. And look at the US there and Alaska somewhere there and UK. So the darker a country is, the more people have been vaccinated. But looking at Africa, we can see that, you know, we are still very few people are vaccinated. I don't know what country, this one here above Algeria, I believe that is Morocco. Yeah, that should be Morocco. So a number of people vaccinated there is quite good percentage. So looking at Kenya, Uganda, South Sudan, etc., we all fall here. But this was in March. But looking at it now, we can see that South Africa has picked up, most of Latin America has picked up, North America, Asia, etc. But it's still, most of Sub-Saharan Africa is really lagging behind. Zimbabwe has done somehow okay there. And I just want to leave it there, not to be a monologue, and then we can discuss later in case there are questions. I believe there are too many of them, but over to you, Chair. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Much, Dr. vis-a-vis, I'm interested to know, is people respond to vaccine depending on the environment they're living, especially for the universal vaccines like COVID? That's the first question. Then the second one was Dr. Charles. Thank you for presenting today. What is your take on this vaccine being administered to breastfeeding mothers? Were trials done on this group? That's a second question. And there's a third question. If you look at COVID-19, especially in Africa, some people are of the idea that the mortality is low. Therefore, there's no need for vaccines. So as Africans, should we then compare the unknown cost of the vaccine and the benefits of letting nature take its course? And then the fourth question, I think this is the last one, there's no other question. Should governments let private markets in the procurement of vaccine?
Am I to answer them right away?
And yes.
Hello? Am I supposed to answer these questions right away, moderators?
Government to correct market imperfect access, and this is an issue I would like to. Sorry, I would beg to move on and invite Tandeka Moyo Gwete to.
Can you allow me to share my screen?
Yes. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to share my screen and it is not working at the moment. It's saying the host has disabled screen sharing. So if I could be made co-host maybe. Okay, it's being worked on. While that is happening, I will just give a brief introduction of myself. So I'm Thandeka Moyogwete. I'm a senior scientist at the NICD in South Africa. The NICD is the National Institute for Communicable Diseases, and we're based in Johannesburg. And we are a lab, we're a research lab. We look at HIV antibody responses. But since COVID came about, now we look at COVID antibody responses. So why we do that is because antibodies are very important when we look at a vaccine. What a vaccine makes, you get a vaccine and it makes antibodies, and those antibodies are the ones that protect you from getting the virus. So let me try again. I'm still unable to share my screen. Let's see what's going on. Okay, I'm co-host now, so I should be able to share my screen. Please just confirm if you can see it in full screen. So I'll be speaking a bit about the future of COVID-19 vaccines in Africa. So Charles, you've made a very good introduction about vaccines in general, but I guess I want to touch on a little bit of the fact that the vaccines may need to change as time goes on, and I'll explain why. So Charles has done a great job, and some of our slides actually match each other. The first slide I was going to show was about the phases of vaccine design, and Charles has shown this very well, so I'll go through it very briefly. But as Charles said, in the beginning, it's always this exploratory preclinical trial. So us as researchers in the lab, we look at different ways how we can make this vaccine. The first thing we do is we look at it in cells, just normal cells, just in a lab environment. If it works in cells, then we go on and use mice. Some people even go on and use primates and check whether it works there. Only after that, only after looking at cells, only after looking at animals, do we then go into the phase 1 clinical trial. So already in the phase 1 clinical trial, you've done a lot of the groundwork already. But that's a very small number of people. After that, we go into phase 2, which is more people. We're looking not only at safety, but we're also looking at, does it make an immune response, these antibodies that I'm talking about. After that, it's phase 3, which is a huge clinical trial. So thousands and thousands of people are now recruited. And now you want to see how effective is the vaccine. Then it gets approved. After that, there's still some processes that have to go on: manufacturing, marketing, negotiating with governments to get the vaccine out and at a reasonable price, for example. Usually this takes about 10 to 15 years. But with COVID, it's happened in record time. It's happened in 1 year. And I think a lot of people get very worried saying, oh, it usually takes 10 to 15 years. Why for COVID is it so fast? It must be a terrible vaccine. It probably isn't safe. But that's not the case. The problem is, here it says the exploratory size takes 2 to 3 years. While with COVID, remember in the early 2000s, there was that SARS outbreak that was in China. And from there, people have been working on a COVID vaccine, so a coronavirus vaccine based on SARS-1. So there's already been this head start with this preclinical work because people have been looking at SARS-1 and now they're looking at SARS-2, and they've been able to translate that very fast. Then when it comes to these phase 1 to phase 3, it usually takes 2 years for each of the phases, but that's not because that the clinical trial takes a long time, but it's because of the administration. You apply for ethics, the ethics department takes months and months to actually look at it. Then you go on to the next stage and you have to ask sort of policymakers, oh, can we do this? That takes a lot of time. Then after that, you recruit people, but the recruitment is always slow, so that takes time. So it's not the fact that the actual trial takes time. The problem is the logistics to get there. And a lot of this has been fast tracks. Ethics has been fast tracks. A lot of the regulators have said, okay, go ahead and do it, and not wasting time with all the office and all the paperwork. So in terms of the safety, all the COVID vaccines have gone through all these critical stages, and the fact that they get approved or the FDA says, okay, we're ready and we trust it, it means that all the due diligence has happened. Another thing that's happened very fast is this post-approval stage, where governments are procuring it very fast. The negotiations are taking weeks instead of months. So all of that is making it happen a lot faster. So it doesn't actually impact on the safety, but it just shows that the logistics are happening much faster. So this is another slide that the previous doctor showed as well, but I just wanted to show it again to show the different COVID vaccines that are out there. And what's remarkable and exciting, I guess, for me as a scientist is that for the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, this is the first time that this RNA-based vaccine has actually happened. And why that's interesting is that the RNA, it's faster to make and it's potentially cheaper. So this is actually an avenue that in HIV people are now looking at, like, could this also work in HIV? So this is actually very, very exciting. And as previously mentioned, there are all sorts of different types of vaccines. We have a viral vector, the RNA that was spoken about. The Sinovac uses an inactivated vaccine. The Johnson & Johnson one also uses this viral vector. So the Johnson & Johnson one is the one that is currently being rolled out in South Africa. And I'll speak a little bit about that because we started with AstraZeneca, and then I'll speak about why we're not using that anymore, but now why it's Johnson & Johnson. And an advantage of the Johnson & Johnson is that it's only one dose, as well as it's stable for up to 3 months in a normal fridge temperature. And I think it's important why the one dose is essential, because it's very hard to get people to come back for 2 doses. Think about someone in a rural setting who doesn't have access to a healthcare facility that's close by. So being able to just go once to the clinic, get your dose and go back is actually very beneficial. So the Johnson & Johnson one is actually a very favorable vaccine if you look at it in that way. But like I've read in a lot of tweets and memes, they always say the best vaccine to get is the one that is available to you. So whichever vaccine that you can get, please go out and get it. But as we've all heard, a virus will always change. And we hear a lot about the virus mutating and changing, and it sounds very scary, but that's what a virus does. A virus is, it enters into the human body, and antibodies and all sorts of immune cells start fighting against it, and the virus tries to change so that it can shield itself. And some viruses are faster than other. HIV mutates very, very fast. In one individual, HIV will be millions and millions times mutated. But SARS-CoV-2, which is a virus causing COVID-19, it actually mutates very slowly compared to other viruses, but is still causing some problems. So here are all sorts of different variants. I'm sure you've heard about variants, which just shows that there are changes that have been identified from the original strain that came from Wuhan. So in panel number 1 is the strain that is in the UK. There's also one that was first found in South Africa. So a lot of people will say the South African variant, the Brazil variant, the UK variant, and we should try and not associate a place with a variant name. So we should call it by its proper name, which is terrible numbers. I don't know why they do this B1.1.7, but that's how they do it. But it's better to refer to it as that instead of saying, oh, the Tanzanian one, the Philippines one, because it then makes it seem as if this country has developed this variant. But no, for example, the one that was first found in South Africa, it's now been independently found in other countries. So it's not specifically a South African variant. But there are concerns about the variant and what it actually affects with the current vaccines that we have. And so in our lab, we recently published this paper that looked at the efficacy of the ChAdOx vaccine. The ChAdOx vaccine is the AstraZeneca one that was made with Oxford University. So what we looked at, and I'll just show you this graph very simply, but all these dots represent a person who has been vaccinated with the AstraZeneca vaccine. And this is their response. So they have a very good response. So the higher the dot, the better the response. And this is against the original COVID-19 vaccine, COVID-19 virus, the one from Wuhan. But if you look at this person, this is their response to this variant that was identified in South Africa, this new variant, the B1351. And you can see that the dots go down, which shows that the immune response is no longer there towards this variant. And this is a bit concerning because what it means is that even if you are vaccinated with the AstraZeneca vaccine, and then you get exposed to one of these variants, you won't be protected. And that's a very big concern. And so this was actually South Africa got the AstraZeneca vaccine beginning of February, around there. And then this data, we published this data around the same time, and the rollout was halted. And now we've had to give away the Chaddox vaccine to other countries which don't have the variant so that they can use it. But it definitely shows that it won't be as effective. So we have to start looking for new ways. And I mean, a lot of the vaccine companies are starting to make new vaccines, which are based on the different variants so that we can get a good response. But there's always light at the end of the tunnel. And this is actually data that we published this week on the 7th of April. And this was published, and there's my name. So what we looked at here is, again, the dots represent a person and their response. And this is now showing that if somebody is infected, whether with the new variant, this is the name for the new variant that was identified in South Africa, or the original virus, the dots still stay relatively the same. There's still a response. And what that means is basically, if we make a vaccine that's based on one of these new variants, we will be able to get sort of a protective response against all the different variants. So that's a very, very good news. But I'll just conclude here and say that the world in general has developed COVID-19 vaccines in record time. And the thing is, we may need to continue updating these vaccines as the virus change. And that's similar to flu. Flu changes very regularly, and that's why we have the seasonal flu vaccine. So every year you'll be getting it. It might not happen for COVID. We might have to just get one booster and that's it, but we'll see as time goes on. And this is already happening. So Moderna and Pfizer are already testing different types of COVID vaccines based on these new variants. And just to say that this vaccine is still the most effective way to eradicate the virus. Like smallpox, it was only a vaccine that enabled smallpox to be eradicated. And so we definitely need to have the buy-in to use a vaccine. So with that, I will end it and stop sharing my screen and take any questions.
For that presentation. We are actually going deeper into these vaccines, and we're seeing what is happening also on the side where people are looking at what changes are happening to this to this virus as it is evolving and coming up. So that is South Africa had to do away with their plans to vaccinate using AstraZeneca, and they have gone for J&J. Of course, it comes with other advantages as well, including cost. So that is a plus, that we are able even to get into that kind of space as Africa. Thank you very much, Thandeka. Now, we would like to get into the last presentation, and then we allow people to ask questions. I do see that we have a few more questions, so that let me just read them out so that we don't lose track. There's one that if you look at mortality in Africa, some people have the idea that mortality is low because there's no need for a vaccine in Africa. I think I read this one. Should government allow the private sector? This one talks also about the nursing mothers. Can they take the vaccine? And then the other thing is that what are the long-term effects of these vaccines because of the speed at which they have been developed? And should Africa focus on non-European vaccines rather than focus on the European developed ones? And then there's also the issue of vaccine hesitancy. What does human behavior look like in terms of people wanting to take the vaccine? Are there any pointers to that? So we'll take those questions when we get to the question and answer session. At this moment, I would like to thank Thandeka, and I would also like to ask our host or co-host to give rights to the next presenter, Professor Kunonga, Edward Kunonga, who is going to be the last panelist, and then we'll get into the question and answer session. So, Edward, please take it up.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moyo, for the introduction, and also thank you to my previous panelists who have made my job a lot easier because they've covered everything. So my job is just to hopefully sum it up and bring it home. So my name is Edward Kunonga. I am a professor of public health and policy at Teesside University. I'm also working as a public health consultant and epidemiologist in the NHS in National Health Service in the northeast of England. I previously served as a director of public health for 2 local authorities. And just as a disclaimer, I am not here to represent any organization. I'm here in my personal capacity, but that's not to say my views are very different from the prevailing public health advice that we are giving both here in the UK and also in other settings. I feel very privileged to have done quite a number of these sessions. We've lost count now on how many we have done, but done this with colleagues here in the UK. We have done a session for colleagues in the DRC, colleagues in Zimbabwe. We've also got a session lined up for colleagues in Uganda. So I say privileged because I think it's very important during this pandemic that we make sure people have access to the information that enables them to make an informed decision. These sessions are not meant to convince you or to change your mind, but they are there to help share some insight into vaccines, COVID-19 vaccines, and hopefully allay some of the fears. The World Health Organization has highlighted that as well as dealing with the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, we are also dealing with an infodemic. An infodemic they describe as the situation where there's just so much information that many people are very confused. Information that is being circulated through social media, information being circulated in newspapers, and also high-profile people, whether it is politicians, religious leaders, cultural leaders who are sharing their views, and obviously they are sources of information. If we had more time, I would have gone into talking about 3 types of information disorders that we have known about for some time, but have become very prevalent during this pandemic, which are misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. And there are subtle but very important differences in those information disorders, both in terms of the accuracy or the falseness or the degree of falseness of the information, as well as the intention to cause harm. And we now know that quite a number of some of the misinformation being circulated is deliberately produced by some people with an intent and with a clear objective to deceive or to redirect people towards some of their other products. So again, we can pick up on some of that in the question and answer session. So vaccine hesitancy is a concept that in public health we have known for quite some time. It has applied to a wide range of vaccination programs. Whenever you've got a vaccination program, you will always have people who are hesitant. You will have 5 categories of people, generally speaking. You'll have people who generally accept all vaccines without even questioning. And this category includes my mom, who took me for vaccinations as a child without even wanting to know the microbiology, the virology, or the vaccinology that is behind that. She just believed this is right for my kid, and she took me there, and I'm so grateful for the decisions she made for me when I couldn't decide for myself. Then there are those who accept but will have doubts. And we are seeing quite a number of people who are in that lighter shade of green. Yeah, I accept. I've got no problems with vaccinations whatsoever. I'm actually up to date with all of my other vaccines, but for this one, I do have concerns. And that's fine because of the scale of the COVID-19 disease, and then the misinformation, the disinformation, and the malinformation that we are getting, including some of it coming from credible or people who we respect. So you can understand why people will have doubts. Then there's some people who accept, but they delay or they refuse. They kind of, well, let me just wait and see. I want to see how many people get vaccinated and then I can make up my mind. We're in the process of writing a paper with colleagues to describe the pattern of vaccine uptake that we have seen, certainly in the UK, and that what we are beginning to see, certainly in Zimbabwe, where you start off slow and then you gather sufficient enough critical mass of people who've been vaccinated, and then suddenly you're on a steep curve. I know in Zimbabwe, they're now on to, I think yesterday, the CIT rep that I saw talked about having vaccinated over 13,000 people in one day. But when we first started, it was less than 500 in the whole country. So there is this pattern of people wanting to seek safety numbers, and once they've seen sufficient enough numbers, nothing has happened to them, then they will participate in the program. Then there's two groups who basically talk about refusing the vaccine, either out of a strong conviction or out of principle. And then that also includes vaccine deniers. And we respect that position. And sometimes it's not really useful to spend your time when someone has got a decision that they have made in principle against a vaccine or any other medical intervention. And what I usually say is we have to agree that there will be some people for this vaccine, as is the case for other vaccines, who will just refuse and deny despite the overwhelming and compelling evidence that exists on the effectiveness and safety of these vaccines. So vaccine hesitancy is something we have dealt with before, but the scale that we have seen is significantly higher for COVID-19. So I'm just going to talk you through very quickly a framework which I came across in our presentations, which has helped me to really consolidate the issues regarding COVID-19 vaccines. So it is the BRAIN framework. Every letter within BRAIN stands for something. So B is for the benefits. What are the benefits of taking this course of action? What are the risks associated? What are the alternatives? What is the instinct? What does this make sense to me? Does it feel right? And then what happens should I do nothing? And you'll be pleased to know that most of this has already been covered by my core panelists. But just very quickly, what are the benefits? So we know vaccines, second only to water and sanitation, have led to significant improvements in population health outcomes. Every time a vaccine is introduced, we see a massive decline in the number of notifications, we see a massive decline in the number of cases, and depending on the nature of the disease, we see a massive reduction in the complications, death in some cases from that infectious disease. And it's not an exception for COVID-19. So we know certainly in areas that have been tracking the outcomes for COVID-19 vaccinated cohorts compared to non-vaccinated, they are already beginning to see this arrangement. I will skip through that slide because my colleagues have already spoken about that. In Israel is one country that has had a massive uptake of their vaccination program. And what you can see here is what has been happening in Israel to the cases of COVID-19. And we now have got a lot more compelling evidence that is showing us that vaccines can also contribute to a reduction in transmission in the community. So in Israel, they saw a massive reduction in the cases once they started the vaccination program. They saw a massive reduction in hospital admissions, and they also saw a massive reduction in terms of severe hospitalization. So these are people who end up needing critical care or other more invasive treatments as a result of COVID-19. Now, these 2 points are very important. A, because we know that those people who end up needing hospitalization generally have got poorer outcomes compared to those who manage in the communities. But it also has got a very important point in terms of our other access to healthcare. Most of our hospitals worldwide have been designated as COVID-19 centers, which means that all the other non-COVID-19 issues are taking second priority. So if vaccines, and we're seeing this in Israel, the UK published its data yesterday, very similar pattern. If vaccines lead to that, then it frees up our hospitals to deal with all the other non-COVID-19 public health challenges we had. Imagine having a road traffic accident and you need in critical care, but there is no ICU bed, or actually you have a stroke, or you have a heart attack, or all the other issues that we were battling with. So there is a secondary and very important population health benefit in getting this right to free up our health resources to deal with all the other challenges that we know we have and will continue to have. So R in the brain framework is for risks. So what are some of the risks? Well, most of the risks are perceived rather than real. Here's a study that was done last year looking at some of the drivers for vaccine hesitance, and the majority of people are concerned about safety. Some people are concerned about efficacy. Does this work? And then you have people who think, oh, the disease is mild and it won't affect me. And my colleagues have already highlighted issues around safety, and have provided that reassurance that no corners were cut in the production of the vaccine. And actually the fact that we hear issues such as the blood clots should be a reassurance that the safety mechanisms in place are working, and they're picking up some of these things and ruling them out when they are not vaccine related. So we now know that the vaccines have been delivered worldwide, millions and millions of vaccines. And if those WhatsApp messages, those YouTube videos were true, that people will start to have uncontrolled shaking, they will start to have all these issues, I'm sure by now we would have lots and lots. We wouldn't even need WhatsApp videos. We would be seeing it on the mainstream news. So here is the number of people vaccinated as of April the 9th. So I downloaded this morning. You can see the massive numbers of people who have participated in these vaccination programs. And yes, there might have been some issues highlighted, such as the blood clots, which we can deal with in the question and answer session. But actually, in terms of the sheer number of people who participated, and these extremely rare events should give people reassurance that these are safe and effective. So some people might say, well, what are my alternatives? Give me what my alternatives are. So we know very well that one of the options is to wait for you to get the infection and hope that you've got active immunity, and then you develop your natural immunity that way. Now, we now know from the studies that natural immunity does not last very long. It wanes over time. And actually, even people who have had COVID-19 are being encouraged to participate in the program. Some of you might say, well, what about passive immunity? So I know Charles, because of the trade he's in, will talk a lot more about plasma therapy. And we now know that research has shown that there is no effective plasma therapy intervention for this disease. Some people might say, well, what about drug treatments? What if I take ivermectin? What if I take prednisolone, silver, zinc? What if I take garlic, all the other things? We now know, certainly this week, the WHO published its latest update on these drug treatments, and they've ruled out ivermectin as having an effective impact on prevention and treatment, despite all the claims that people might be making. So at the moment, ivermectin is not on the picture, same as hydrochloroquine, same as steroids, except for use for those people in critical care, and also for remdesivir, which again has got very selected patients that would benefit from that. Then some people might say, what about supplements? What if I have lots of vitamin C, zinc, ginger, garlic, herbal treatments from my own native country across the border? We're using a herb called Zumbani. What about that? What about steaming? There is, again, no confirmed evidence that those things prevent or treat COVID-19. That's not to say we can't use them. We know from historic arrangements that these things they can have some benefit. They can help boost your immunity, but they will not prevent COVID-19, and they will not cure it. They might help in alleviating symptoms. And what about, what are the alternatives that we know where the evidence base is there? So far, the only two things we have in our toolkit is infection prevention and control approaches. So washing your hands, wearing a face mask, and keeping the distance. And now we've got overwhelming evidence on the vaccine. The rest of the stuff is not as effective. So if you are looking for an alternative that gives you the same benefit of the vaccines, sorry, there isn't such an alternative. Intuition, I'll finish off on that in my last slide. What if I do nothing? This again is data I downloaded this morning on the worldwide distribution of cases. Over 135 million people have had COVID-19 worldwide. There have been almost 3 million deaths. That is quite a significant number of people who have died. And yes, there is a significant number of people who have also recovered. But that's, if you do nothing, well, yeah, you could end up being well with mild disease or asymptomatic, but the chances are that up to 2% of people will end up with death as the outcome. And that is ranging in many different countries. In Zimbabwe, at our peak, our case fatality rates was almost 5%. And on that data, there is the Zambian picture. 8,000 to 9,000 people have had the infection, and there is the number of deaths, and then the number of people who have ended up in critical care. So if you decide to do nothing, well, you might be amongst the lucky ones, but we know if you've got a profile of other factors, such as working in areas of high exposure as a healthcare worker, or if you're older, over 60, or if you've got underlying long-term conditions, sadly, your chances are not as great as the rest of the population. So doing nothing, yeah, you might win, but it's a bit like trying to play the lottery or the Russian roulette with your own life. The decision is still individual, but what we know is that this disease is serious. It can cause significant complications. Long COVID here in the UK, we know that people who have recovered from COVID continue to have a wide range of symptoms, some of them which can be life-changing. So intuition, I'll just finish off with my personal position. So I use the brain framework to just think about this for myself. So was I hesitant at one point? Of course I was, both professionally curious, but also individually, because of all the concerns. I was also receiving those WhatsApp messages and also those armchair epidemiologists and people who have got PhDs from the University of WhatsApp, University of YouTube, which gives people expertise overnight. But I also wanted to determine this for myself. So on the 7th of January, I was given an opportunity, which I took up. The vaccine that I was offered, which I took, I didn't go and say, can I have that one? Was the Pfizer BioNTech, and followed that up on the 24th of March with my second dose. And so for me, the brain framework helped me to come to a decision that weighing up the risks and the benefit, the vaccine will work for me. And I've been encouraging everyone else that I can ever since. So I'll stop there, Chair, and happy to come back in the question and answer session.
Thank you very much for that high quality delivery. You can see that Africa is actually taking its place in the area of science, and I think we are ready as Africa, you know, to respond to COVID, as it were. Thank you very much, Prof. Edward Kunonga, and it was good interacting with you on this webinar. So, any immediate reactions from the panelists to the questions that are in the Q&A box? Any immediate reactions? And some are actually directed to the panelists there. So, Dr. Charles, thank you for presenting today. What is your take on the vaccine? Take it on, Charles.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Crispin. I think there are things here to really be set right, and I should say what we are doing here is not to coerce people to take the vaccines, but it's just to enlighten people to the best of what we know about this infection. So it's up to individuals to be for it or not to be for it. But also there are lots of questions, as Edward has said, that he has gone through, people who graduated from WhatsApp and Facebook and YouTube universities, you know. So I think there are more than enough to say, but I will just try to just narrow down to facts and basics. One question that had been so common I keep receiving is about ivermectin. And I feel like debunking the myth around ivermectin. Ivermectin, first of all, it is a tablet that is produced initially to treat infections in animals. It wasn't meant for human beings. And the name ivermectin, the mectin of it comes from the MIIC, which is a company producing it in the US. And MIIC is a very big pharmaceutical company. And when I was a student doing my master's in tropical medicine and infectious diseases about, I don't know how many years ago, one of the members from the pharmaceutical company, the same, came, and that was when this company declared that as long as there is filaria, they are ready to produce mectizan. It used to be called mectizan, but now it is now ivermectin, free of charge, and they can transport it for everyone who needs it as long as it is needed. So that's a huge undertaking by a pharmaceutical company. Now, looking into the fact that there are some evidences that came up and the studies that says ivermectin might work or it might not work. A lot of papers have been written. And the countries that have taken this on board are mainly Latin American companies. I mean Latin American countries, namely Peru, and I think Bolivia, and there is one other, not Ecuador, but I want to believe it's Uruguay or another country that I can't now figure out. So they decided that, okay, our national ministries of health, we're going to enroll ivermectin to our COVID patients to use it as preventive and as a treatment, preventive medication, and as well as a treatment for COVID-19 patients. And then Peru pulled off when PAHO, which is a Pan-American health organization like EMRO in Euro, it's a WHO basically that is looking after the region of the Pan Americas, came up with a statement saying, look, we don't have enough scientific evidence to say this works because it hasn't been thoroughly investigated. It hasn't been reviewed. It hasn't, like a lot of things with the studies that have come up to say ivermectin works. That's one. Two, the argument of the people that were proposing that ivermectin works are as follows. One, the enrollment of vaccine is too slow, and there are a lot of classes. As before I said, it should go to people above 85 of age, then it should come to healthcare workers, etc. But people are dying. Younger people also are dying. So if we can give them this ivermectin anyway while they wait for the vaccine, why not? So their argument is not that vaccine doesn't work, but the argument is that, you know, the waiting, the hierarchy is too long. So if there is something that has shown some sort of evidence anyway, whether it's going to work or not, why not use it? Their other argument is that ivermectin has an excellent profile in pharmaceuticals. Side effects wise, almost zero. Severe side effects, almost minus something, I can say. So it doesn't kill. Anyway, let them take. If it protects them, that is fine. If it didn't, that is okay. But the argument of scientific community is Once you begin giving people this false information and giving them paracetamol and saying it works against COVID, how are they going to accept vaccination when it comes that it is their turn to take it? And by not accepting vaccination, how protected are we as a community, the herd immunity that Professor was talking about earlier on? How are we going to develop this? So I think this is a very crucial point to really disseminate in this forum, that ivermectin, even in the UK, there is a group currently formed to look at all the evidences and collect. And there had been a discussion whether to include ivermectin as one of the arms in recovery trial or not. But the experts that chooses what medication to be included in trial, they thought there is not enough evidence to define the antiviral effect of ivermectin against a parasitic infection, against a viral infection such as COVID. So there's no rationale behind it, and this has been dropped. So I think we should be a little bit cautious when medications are recommended to us. Some people are saying, look, one of those studies said in sub-Saharan Africa, people are not dying of COVID because ivermectin is widely used. Okay, fine. But how many countries in sub-Saharan Africa have used ivermectin in mass distribution against onchocerciasis, for example? My country is one of them, South Sudan, but people still die of COVID. So how do we explain the death due to COVID among people who receive ivermectin twice on a yearly basis? So I think there are lots of things here to debunk. Now, just to get me down to some of those questions that were asked about breastfeeding mothers. The answer is that a breastfeeding mother should receive their COVID-19 vaccine like any other person. There's no contraindication to that. And the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, they have they actually issued a statement saying breastfeeding mothers can receive, pregnant women can receive as well, not only breastfeeding mothers. So there is no contraindication to that. And about the COVID-19 being low in sub-Saharan Africa, and should we allow nature to take its course or not? I think I'll leave that to Professor to answer, because that's more of an epidemiological and environmental factors playing in here, but I'll leave that to Professor. Now, private market and vaccines. I think this brings a lot of questions into equity. Let's imagine that these vaccines are sold. Private companies can buy them. Fine. Private companies will buy, and then they will decide to buy the whole thing and then say, okay, look, we are not going to bring this to the market unless you pay £500 per dose. And for 2 doses, you need £1,000. How many people are going to afford that? So the scientific community and the ethical community, the WHO, they said countries must be prevented. I mean, the pharmaceutical companies must be prevented from selling vaccine to any private company. They should sell it to countries, governments, but not private companies, because equity question will come in immediately. People will make billions of dollars and millions of people will die. Now about nursing mother, I think I have already spoken about this. And then there was a question about long-term effects, the periodicity of production of vaccines. I think I will leave that to Dr. Tandeka to tackle that, why vaccine has taken so quick to be produced and given to people. And you have already touched on that earlier on, but I will leave that to you. Over to you, Felix.
Over to me or Crispin?
Take it up, Dr. Tandeka, please.
Thank you.
Take it up.
Yeah, so one of the questions that has come up a lot, not even in this forum, is about whether this vaccine will be different in the African population as it is to the European one. And I think it's a very important thing to consider, because a lot of medicines have been only tested in the Western world, then they come here and they affect us differently. But what's good about this is that a lot of the vaccines were actually tested in the African population before they've been given out to everyone. So AstraZeneca, the Novavax, and J&J, they all had trials within South Africa, and it was across different racial groups. And it's been shown to be safe in all the different racial groups. So we shouldn't be worried that it'll affect us differently because it has been tested. And it's actually funny because when they said, oh, we're gonna start doing trials in Africa, there were so many people saying, oh, they want us to be guinea pigs. But that's the whole point. It needs to be tested all over the world. So it's actually very important. So that has been done. So that shouldn't be anyone's concerns that it hasn't been tested in the African population. But having said that, Africa is very diverse, of course. And obviously people in South Africa have very different genetics to other places. So I think it shows the importance of testing it everywhere. But as it stands currently, in all the population groups it's been tested in, it has been shown to be safe. Then there was another question about, it was on the private chat, I think. Someone saying, what about animal rights when I spoke about vaccines and things being tested in animals first? So just to say that there's a lot of ethics and consideration that goes in. You actually have to make sure when you plan an experiment that it's not harming the animal, that the animal won't be put in any harm, and it's actually reviewed by an ethics committee. So that is addressed, so you don't have to worry that sort of animals are being harmed within the process. Then there was also the question about mortality being low in Africa, so do we even need a vaccine? So what I would want to say to flip that a bit is that there's mortality, but there's also morbidity. Morbidity is how badly you're affected by a vaccine. So it's been shown people who are hospitalized and they put on respirators and they need help breathing. Their lungs sometimes don't recover as they were before. So they could have lifelong problems. So even if you're infected and you get very sick, that could also have a burden on the healthcare system and your quality of life. So I think in everything, we want to prevent mortality. We also want to prevent people from getting sick and illnesses. And even to say that, yes, the death rate might be low in some African countries, but even with that, I don't think there should ever be a time we say, oh, it's okay to let a few die for the greater good of everyone. So I think everyone should get equal healthcare and should be protected if possible. There was also another question on, I think, the private channel as well, about the comment on HIV and why, you know, we have a COVID vaccine so quickly, but HIV, we still don't have one. And so, I mean, I've heard that a lot, but even though they're both viruses, they're extremely, extremely different. They are at opposite poles of the virus spectrum. So with HIV, if somebody is infected with it, it actually integrates into your DNA. It becomes part of you, you can say, and you can't ever be cured from it. And that's the problem. It actually goes there and it hides inside, and it's a lifelong infection. Where with COVID, you get it and you can eventually take it out. You won't have COVID in your body the rest of your life. So they're very, very different, and many, many problems with HIV. As I spoke about, HIV mutates, it changes so fast, but COVID is very slow to change. So it's easier to make a vaccine based on COVID because it stays very much the same, and maybe we'll need, you know, a few vaccines every couple of years. But with HIV, it changes at such a fast rate that we can't keep up. So it's a much trickier virus. It's very different, and it's nothing like pharmaceutical companies hiding things from us or anything. There's no conspiracy there. It's just two different viruses, so we can't bunch them together. Yes, I think that will be all, but I can come back for more. Oh, I did want to say something about pregnant women. So I think, yeah, we're all still learning, and there are a lot of different policies out there. So I know in South Africa for the J&J, if you're pregnant, you are excluded from getting it just because there hasn't been a clinical trial to say that it's safe in pregnancy. And they actually say that if you get pregnant within 3 months of getting the vaccine, you must report it so that they can follow and see what the effect is. So we're still trying to learn what actually happens within pregnant women. So in a lot of cases, it hasn't been authorized for pregnant women. For lactating women, yes, some vaccines you can definitely take it and it's safe. In pregnant women, check the vaccine that you are getting and what they say and what the regulations are in the country. Yeah.
Okay, I can pick up from there if that's okay. I think most of the questions my colleagues have answered, but I will, because I've just taken note of some of the questions in the chat. So there was a question regarding human rights and whether vaccines should be made mandatory. Absolutely not. I think vaccines should always be left to individual choice, but it needs to be informed choice. So we need to make sure that people have got the right information in line with the Human Rights Act. So people have the right information and they make their decisions. I think the issue that, again, is not new is whether people can then travel in between countries. And as you can see, most countries are doing the best they can to reduce the risk of further transmission cross borders. And we know that vaccine passports have been there before, and it's likely that this one will be added onto that list. If you're traveling to some countries, you need a yellow fever passport, you need to clear yourself against whatever infectious disease. So that is in line with standard practice, and you can understand if this then subsequently became a requirement. But travel is by choice, and we all have to comply with the immigration requirements, which include the fact that you are safe to enter whatever country it is, be it from infectious disease, bioterrorism, or anything else associated with that. There was a question whether we should take it or not. As we say, this session is not really about telling you what to do, but if you were to ask me for my advice, I would say if you weigh the benefits against the risks, I would encourage you to take it, but ultimately it is your decision. I have encouraged people, including my own mother, who I should start including her picture. So Gogo Kunonga, as we call her, got her vaccine 2 weeks ago. She's now due to go for her second dose in Harare. So again, if I could recommend it to my mother, who I love so dearly, I'm sure I can recommend it to anyone else. And it so happens on the day she was vaccinated, my sister-in-law, who had given her a lift and taken her there, was asked if she wanted, and again, she was also vaccinated. So within my family, for the people I love and who are very closest to me, my recommendation to them is take it on. And for you, as part of my bigger human family, my recommendation, but I can't tell you what to do, would be for you to participate in the program when you are offered. I think Tandeka raised a very important point, and I think Charles touched on it briefly, which is the rollout of the vaccination program is not yet universal. So the rollout in every country is prioritizing those people who are most likely to end up with severe disease and likely to end up with poor outcomes. And there are three, broadly speaking, key considerations that every country is taking. They are prioritizing this on the basis of age, because we know from the international epidemiology, the older you are, especially those who are over 60, tend to be overrepresented in the number of people who are hospitalized and who end up with poor outcomes. That picture is changing, but you'll find most countries will prioritize their populations over 60 or over 65. The second key consideration that all countries who are rolling out this program is underlying health conditions. So we know that people with underlying health conditions, regardless of age, tend not to do so well when they get COVID infection. And so there is a wide range of different underlying health conditions that are being considered. We know cardiometabolic conditions like diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, being obese, respiratory diseases, all of those long-term conditions. And we generally say, if you are taking regular medication for something, you are most likely to end up on that prioritization list. Then the third consideration is those people whose jobs leave them to be highly exposed. So that's why you're seeing healthcare workers being primarily the people who are being targeted first, but most countries have got a definition of essential workers, those people who come into regular contact with the general population and whose risk will be greatest. So those are the three main considerations as the program gets rolled out, and as the vaccine becomes more available, then you then get to subsequent phases where you then potentially open this up to the rest of the population. So that then means that if you are pregnant and you're a pregnant healthcare worker, here in the UK, what we are saying is the risk to your health and the risk, because we have seen sadly deaths in women who were pregnant who got COVID-19 from the severity of the disease, we are then recommending for them to say, yes, we know the trials did not include pregnant women, but we have got no biologically plausible explanation why this could cause adverse effects to you and the baby. But we know that if we left you unprotected, then the risk to you and the baby could be devastating. So we are vaccinating pregnant women who fall into those three categories, either because of, well, it's mainly two categories, because it's very unlikely for your over 65s to be pregnant. Not that it doesn't happen, but it's unlikely. So we do have people who have got underlying long-term conditions or who are in jobs that mean that they are at greater risk. And for those people, we weigh the risks and the benefits, and we say we'd rather you were protected because we have got no reason to suspect that it will cause the adverse effects, despite the fact that you were not represented within the trial. So that's why it's very important for healthcare workers mainly, because in most countries, these are the starting cohorts, and you're likely to have younger healthcare workers who have got issues around breastfeeding, who have got concerns around fertility, and who have got all the other concerns. Here in the UK, the Royal College of Obstetrics and Gynecology have again said, if you are offered, it means you are at greater risk. We have got no concerns regarding fertility. And interestingly, as an anecdote, we know in some of the trials, because when you're recruited into these trials, you are asked, we exclude people who are pregnant or who are planning to be pregnant. Now, there are some people who said we're not planning, but actually ended up being pregnant during that time, and those people had been vaccinated as well. So if it does lead to fertility problems, then those people would not have become pregnant. We also know that you cannot, there is no clearly defined pathway where that issue around fertility can be explained. We do know in men, especially, having COVID can lower your sperm count. Not permanently, but in the immediate time after COVID-19, studies have been published of the impact on sperm count. So actually taking the risk of not being vaccinated, you might end up with lowering your fertility, not permanently, having had the COVID-19. We also know that having long COVID can be very life-changing. And in that case, maybe starting a family might be the least of your concerns. So if you weigh out some of those risks associated with not being vaccinated, not being protected, you might find that the fertility argument actually goes out through the window. Then there was the question regarding garlic and ginger and the vaccine. You can carry on taking garlic and ginger vitamin supplements. I take daily dose of vitamin D supplement because of where I live. I get very limited exposure to the sun. I do take those supplements. I'm a big fan of turmeric, garlic. I'm actually trained in lifestyle medicine. So I do those things, but not as a prevention, but generally as part of the wellness approach. So you can still carry on with those. We also know that overconsumption of garlic can be bad for you. So all of these herbal treatments are also drugs, and you just need to be very careful on the doses of those that you are taking. Then the issue around non-European markets, should Africa start developing its own vaccine development capability? Absolutely. We cannot be relying on always having a begging bowl. I think the future is for us to really be a continent that can stand on our own feet. We do have the expertise, we've got young scientists. The future looks bright. And I think if governments can start investing in these areas, the next time round, hopefully we can say, and we have got a vaccine developed in Copperbelt or in Kitwe. I would love for that to be a reality in my lifetime. Then I'll just finish off on two other points that have been raised. There is the issue regarding blood clots. So vaccine-induced blood clots have become a feature. And again, the University of Warsaw is now running rapid courses in being a hematologist and being a virologist and microbiologist. But what we do know is that these are extremely rare events. There are other things that have got blood clots as a side effect, that we participate in on a regular basis, ranging from the use of combined pill, the pill that we use for birth control, all the way through to things such as flying. Flying does come with a risk of blood clots. And if you were to fly on a long haul flight, then your risk is almost between 1 in 500 to 1 in 5,000, depending on the time of your flight. So if you fly from Lusaka to New York, which is likely to take you 2 legs of long haul flights, you might fly somewhere to Europe for 8 hours and then another 8-hour flight, your risk of blood clots is significant. And it is actually very, very much documented, and it's way, way higher than the 1 in at least 250,000, if not 1 in 2 million people who might have a blood clot after the vaccine. We also know, those of you might say, oh, well, flying is not really for me. If you get on an intercity bus in Zimbabwe, it's not unusual for you to travel between Harare and Bulawayo for 4 to 5 hours, 6 hours in some of the slow coaches. Your risk for blood clots is also similarly high. So there are things that we do with with a higher risk that we don't really question. And the fact that these things are being flagged should give us reassurance that the safety mechanisms for monitoring the effectiveness of these vaccines is working and is picking up these things, investigating them, and coming back and providing us with that reassurance. And I'll finish off with one analogy I often give on these talks, which is whenever you get onto a plane, or when you're getting onto a bus. When you get on a plane or a bus, you embark on, and you almost all the time you turn right and you don't turn left. The reason why you turn right on an aeroplane is because you are there to jump on your plane and to get you to the safe destination. You don't even know the pilot's name until he introduces himself, and you don't even need to know where they trained, how they trained, and all of that. You take comfort in that the system checks all of that out. Suddenly, with the vaccines, we have seen people jumping onto the plane and turning left. And they start asking questions. What does that dial do? Why is there no clutch? Where is the handbrake? And using terms that they actually don't even understand. Well, there's no handbrake, there's no clutch. And when you try to explain some of these things, you run out of words, appropriate words for the level of understanding people might have. And we don't do this with any other things. We don't sit down and analyze the flour in the bread that we eat. We don't analyze where the leather in your shoes came from. We just buy on the basis of trust. And what I would encourage people is to trust the authorities in your country, because there are people whose job it is to provide that public duty to ensure that these vaccines are safe in the same way that they do for your chloroquine, for your painkillers, and for everything else. So don't be tempted to turn left. Just turn right, find your seat, and enjoy the flight. And if you got into a flight, a flight, or if you were on a bus and the person announced to you, ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I've just finished watching a YouTube video on how to fly this aeroplane, and I'm still just trying to figure out. I also have got my friends on WhatsApp giving me advice. Most of us would really quickly disembark. So why are we trusting people who have got knowledge from WhatsApp, knowledge from YouTube, and not trusting those people who we have invested in training them to become our experts? So I'll leave you there in terms, the choice is yours. You can either believe someone from the University of WhatsApp, or you can believe those people who spend a bit more time learning about these things and understanding how they work. So I'll rest it there, and happy to come back if there's any points for clarification.
Prof, I see that someone actually put a comment here saying it does not lower sperm count, it denatures them, even ovaries. Can you comment on that?
So I'm not aware of the studies around denaturing ovaries. The study that I'm aware of is the study that was done in China in the earliest days of these. So I cannot confirm or refute that claim. But what I do know is that from the studies, they actually found the quality of the sperm and the count did reduce. There might have been other studies.
No, I agree with you. There hasn't been anything showing complete denaturing, which would mean it removes it completely. So I don't think that is a very big worry for people to have.
And again, just to clarify, that's not the vaccine. That is COVID infection. So I don't want people walking away thinking, oh, I'll get vaccinated, I'll have a lower sperm count for. No, that is if you leave yourself unprotected and you do get active infection, studies have shown that it does have an impact.
I think I'm just trying to come in as well, just to comment on the clothing aspect of COVID-19 vaccines and clothing, and a lot of media roar here and there about countries withholding AstraZeneca vaccine, etc. And just trying to put some data into the whole thing. If you become, unfortunately, infected with COVID-19 and you end up in an ICU or intensive care, your chance of developing a clot is 30 to 70% in intensive care. And your chance of dying out of that clot that COVID made you develop is even significantly higher than 70%. So the question here is, if we can give 1,000 people jabs and one of them will develop a clot, or leave them and 100 of them get infected with COVID and 50 of them end up in ICU and then 20 of them die, where is the benefit here and where is the risk? And that's why it's not the company, but the European Medical Association and even the FDA and all these competent bodies, they have said, look, we are studying this, there are reports coming, but we still believe, looking at the number of people that have been receiving these vaccines, in comparison to the number of people that have developed clots, we still believe that the benefits outweigh the risks. And that's what medicine is all about, really. It's all about balancing the side effect or the worst outcome of the medication you are giving to your patient and the benefits that they will get. If I know that what I'm giving to my patient holds 50-50 chance, I will not do that. I will not give them. Even if I know that it only holds about 25% chance of them going the wrong way, I will not give them. So I think that's something that maybe is also missing outside there, and the anti-vax groups, they go out and invest on such information. Now the other issue is about, there's this myth, which is quite common. I get it from our African brothers and sisters back home, asking me whether, this vaccine is being given, they want to depopulate Africa and kill people. And there's also this myth of, Bill Gates wants to follow us up. You will be injected with this vaccine and then you'll be followed up, monitored by Microsoft. I'm just like asking myself, what has Bill Gates to do with following you up? What does he gain financially out of that? Me in my toilet, for example, or going to take a bus or climbing a tree or whatsoever. What is the financial benefit of it from Bill Gates? That is one. Two, my argument as well is that Bill Gates wants to kill Africans, for example. Then I'm like, if Bill Gates wants to kill Africans, he won't kill them by investing in a vaccine to be imported, to be like taken all the way and putting more money and the effort of injecting. He will just stop funding HIV and malaria programs. That's it. Mosquitoes will kill people, HIV will kill people, and people will die. So it is so difficult to understand why Bill Gates, this is in my own understanding, why Bill Gates as an individual will begin thinking of wanting to kill Black people in a continent called Africa, while he has been supporting and helping programs through the WHO, fundings, whatsoever, Gavi and all that. So I think we just need to sit down with ourselves and think, okay, this information is given to me, that's good. There's no information which is bad, unless if you don't analyze it and use it raw as it is. Take it, analyze, look at the bigger picture. What is the benefit of depopulating the world? What is the benefit of someone wanting to follow you through chipping, something that would let them monitor you from the US, for example? Bill Gates, we are already paying for him anyway, whether we like it or not. We're updating our Windows, Microsoft Windows of our computers every year or whatsoever. Antivirus we are buying. These are all Microsoft tools. These are lots of money that he's making already. So maybe we might just need to relook into those. And the other point, I think someone called Dr. Nyambura asked, why make COVID-19 vaccine optional and not to be compulsory for everyone? Well, I think from in my personal level is that there's no treatment that should be forced to a patient, unless if it really poses global or international threat to public health. But otherwise, COVID-19 is already outside there. We never know. There might come a time whereby people will be forced that, you don't have COVID-19 vaccine, okay, you are not going to travel, you are, etc. And that will automatically force people. But up to now, I think a human being, as they are, should be autonomous in terms of picking what treatment they want, who should treat them, where they want to be treated, and all that. And about the sperm and ovaries question, I think that has already been answered. Over.
Panel, thank you very much for going through all those questions. I think there are quite a lot coming through. I just want to pose this other one that we seem to basically not have answered. I know that for most of the vaccines, we have immediate side effects or adverse events. For example, swelling, feeling general malaise and things like that. But there was a question here on long-term safety. Do we have any hint from the studies that have been done so far that these vaccines that are being administered, the mRNA vaccines, may have longer-term effects other than the ones that are transient and immediate? Yes, I know there are some people who may get serious hypersensitivity reaction because of the vaccine, but do we have any thing we're picking from the works that have been done so far on long-term safety? Anyone of you can take it up.
I can start with answering, and then the other panelists can add as well. But of course, these vaccines have only been rolled out in the last, 8 to 6 months. So it's not as if we have years and years of data in terms of long-term, 10 years, 20 years. But what we have now, tracking it until, the currently, so about 6 to 8 months, there haven't been any major adverse events. So some people, like you say, there are very few cases here and there where they react in certain ways. But talking generally, the general population, there haven't been anything major which would say this vaccine is dangerous, we're taking it off the market. Nothing like that has happened. So we continue, so people are tracking. It's not as if the tracking has stopped. It's a continual process of tracking and tracking and tracking. When you get the vaccine, so I know in the South African context, you actually get a place where you can report anything. And it's not only reporting in the first week, you can report months and months after. So they're still tracking to see what happens in 10, 20 years. But the data that we have now is showing that they are safe.
In addition to what Tandeka just said, I think not only with these vaccines, every single medication that we use, including aspirin, by the way, it's being followed up and monitored. If there is a single significant side effect happens, we have it, we call it yellow card scheme. It is reported and goes to the company. There are medications that we know have been withdrawn after decades of them being used in patients globally. So this vaccine is only a few months in existence. So it will be followed like every other single medication and like every other vaccination that is, or vaccine that is existing. Even there are some anti-HIV, antiretrovirals that have been withdrawn from the market after decades of their use. So every single medical or medicinal product that is outside there being used, it is being followed. I don't know how long it will be followed for, but that's just the nature, the norm of how it is. Thanks.
So what Dr. Charles is saying is that there are mechanisms in place for post-marketing surveillance of these commodities once they have been released on the market and people are using them.
Yes.
In order to make sure that we are continually being alert to any new things that may come up because they have been administered in human beings. Thank you very much, Dr. Charles. Someone was talking.
I was just going to just emphasize, I think Thandeka mentioned it earlier in her presentation, that people hear that, oh, vaccines take 10 to 15 years to manufacture, and they think, oh yeah, so those 10 to 15 years, they were monitoring them for 15 years, and we've got data that takes you back. But actually, the actual intervention is not monitored over that long period of time. What delays it is the bureaucracy in between, which was cut out. Each year here in the UK, we deliver, and elsewhere, a national flu immunization program. The flu vaccine that we utilize each year is developed in year. Now, it is a slight modification, but it still is developed in year. So there are a number of other treatments that we roll out, not necessarily because we are not concerned about the safety, the long-term implications, but because of the level of confidence. Most vaccines, the serious side effects tend to happen almost immediately. So the things that you're really, really worried about from vaccines, you should be able to see within the first 3 to 4 weeks, and then within the month. So again, as we continue to roll this out, we are looking back and saying, well, actually, there is nothing untoward. So people shouldn't really equate the time it takes to develop other vaccines as also that means we've got a long-term safety profile. And as Charles has said, once the drug or the intervention comes on stream, then there is continuing surveillance. But at the moment, there is no cause for concern, because one of the things that people need to understand is going back to basic biology. You need to be able to explain what you are saying is the side effect with a pathway that you can follow, which says this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this person ended up with seizures. What most people do is they jump from vaccine and seizures. We now know that there's people who die after their vaccine, after the COVID-19 vaccination. Some people die from COVID-19 because we know you could have been infected before, and actually the disease has started already causing havoc by the time you get vaccinated. And that's one of the reasons why when you're offered, take it up at the earliest opportunity, because then you start improving your coverage. And then there are people who will die from other things that they would have died from anyway. And the fact that they've had a vaccine can be misleading, and people can then go, oh, so-and-so had a vaccine, and you might have seen these WhatsApp messages. This guy was fit and well, had the vaccine, dead 2 weeks later, the vaccine kills. Well, actually, no, let's investigate what killed him. And is there a pathway that you can say, had the vaccine, this happened in his body, he developed complications, and he ended up dying. And most of the deaths associated with having had a vaccine have been reviewed and investigated. And the conclusion has always been, this is a tragic death, but it cannot be linked to the vaccine. So we just need to be mindful of the WhatsApp games that people play. They'll give you valid information. Yes, the person did die. Yes, they did receive the vaccine, but that does not mean that the vaccine killed them. Yes, the person did have COVID after the vaccination. It does not mean that the vaccine gave them COVID-19. Because again, there are things that, going back to my very much elementary maths in grade 1 or 2, when you were told that there's things that where you say the answer is it can't. And it's the same for the vaccine. There are some things that the vaccine cannot cause, and we just need to make sure that people are confident in some of those things.
Fellow professionals, I think we have done this topic justice. We have talked more to the myths, and we have responded with evidence that some of the myths are actually misfounded. And I would like to really thank all of you for this, for the preparation that has gone into this. I can see all of you came very well prepared with a lot of information based off your experience in working with and around COVID. And some of you have actually frontline experience in attending to clients. So as on behalf of Pax Romana, I would like to really thank you for the input that you have put into this. But as we're getting towards the end, I would like to first of all have each one of you just make a 1-minute remark. What are your take-home messages for each of for the participants? Any take-home message that you want us to carry with us as we go from this presentation today. After that, I'm just going to read to you a short, it's not a poem, but it's something that I picked from the University of WhatsApp, and I'll just read it so that we can actually wrap up our session. And then finally, we'll have a prayer from, we're going to have a vote of thanks from Rebecca, and after that, we'll have a closing blessing from, I'll get the name right. So let us just have one word from each of the panelists. What is our take-home message? And then I'll say my words, then Rebecca can give us the vote of thanks. Charles, you can start.
Yeah, I thought we used the ladies first principle, but I'm happy to go. Yeah, so basically what I want to say is that all the countries that have started enrolling the vaccines, they are prioritized their elderly and then followed by their healthcare workers who are young people, able, and they are the medical professionals. So no country would want to expose their healthcare workers to a vaccine that hasn't been proven and to kill them or to render them infertile. I will leave this with everyone to go and think about it. You want to take the vaccine, that's fine. You don't want to take it also, you know, I will leave it up to you. But I've taken my 2 doses and I feel healthier than I was prior to starting it. And to be honest, I'm now not so much scared when someone coughs in a public place while I'm there in my mask a little bit half down, because I've known that, you know, I have some level of protection. But the message here is that no country would expose its healthcare providers to a vaccine that is going to cause harm. Thanks.
I guess my parting words would be that vaccines save lives. We've seen it for a lot of diseases. A lot of the ones that you've been infected with, a lot of us are here today because of our childhood vaccines. So take it, and the faster we all take it, the faster we go back to normal life. And I think that's something that's very important for all of us. This no more mask, nothing, back to normal life, but that can only happen in a fast way through taking a vaccine. I've also taken my doses. My parents in Zimbabwe have also taken their first dose. So I'm advocated, and please take that vaccine.
Thank you.
Thank you, Thandeka and Charles. From me, it's just make sure you get your information from the correct sources, because there's so much misinformation, malinformation, and disinformation out there. And hopefully the framework which I used for my presentation might help you, which is use your brain. Think about the benefits, the risks, what are the alternatives, what does your intuition tell you, and what is the cost of doing nothing. Thank you.
All right, so that's from the panelists. And I just want to end, before I hand over to Rebecca, just by giving an analogy of the vaccine versus the safety belt. I'm sure you have seen this before. So if you look at the safety belt when it was designed in our cars and the airbag, the question that people are asking is, does it afford good protection? We know that yes, it does afford good protection against fatal injury if you're involved in an accident, just like the vaccine will protect you from COVID. Does it protect you 100% of the time? We know that that's not the case. Just like the vaccine, it may protect you. It may not protect you 100% of the time. Does it prevent you from getting an accident? That is the safety belt or the airbag. No, it doesn't. But just like the vaccine, it does prevent you from getting severe injury if you are ever going to be involved in an accident. If at all you get into an accident, we know that it will reduce the severity of the injuries that you are going to incur. Does it mean that you can be reckless and drive fast just because you are having a seat belt and airbags in your car? That's not the case. So just like the vaccine, it doesn't mean that other prevention measures should not be taken just because you have been vaccinated. Hand washing, safe distancing, and mask use still remain valid. Does a seatbelt mean that you won't injure others on the road because you are wearing it? That's not the case. We know that just like the vaccine, you still can infect others despite you having been vaccinated. So you still need to take care of other people. When I wear the seatbelt, do I think that the manufacturers of the seatbelt, the company that is making them, is making money? No one even thinks about that. But we know that yes, the companies that make these seatbelts are making money. So just like the vaccine, the people who make the vaccines